Welcome to the Finance Marketing Podcast, a show that empowers finance professionals to market their businesses in ways that feel good and actually achieve results. I'm your host, Hillary. I've been working with folks in financial services to develop marketing strategies that work and create results-oriented marketing content since 2020. And I've learned a lot about what works in finance marketing, what doesn't work, and where financial services pros get stuck. Join us each Friday as we explore real, effective ways to market your finance business and connect with folks who truly embody your ideal clients. I am back this week with Aryel Gladden-Banning to talk about, you guessed it, the prospect process. If you have enjoyed this little series on the prospect process, I would love to hear from you, because it tells me that this is something that you're thinking about and that matters to you. And just a quick little aside here, Aryel and I do have some spots available right now in Q2 to help advisors map out, build their prospect process so it's documented, you have templates to work from, and you have a lot of clarity and you're getting data so you know where to make improvements to your prospect process so that ultimately you increase your close rate with leads that are already coming through the door. So if that's something of interest to you, reach out to us. We have doors open until Thursday, May 21st, at which point we will be closing the offer to work with the advisors who have decided to sign on with us. So if that's of interest to you, reach out. We'll start with the discovery call and a little intake form just to see if we think it would be a good fit. No pressure. Those of you who know me know that I am very, very low pressure. So reach out if you're interested at all. Now, today in this conversation, Aryel and I are picking up where we left off in a previous episode on building your solid prospect process. And this time we're getting into the data that you want to look at in order to know where to make improvements. So we're walking back through our real case study of the advisor that we built this for, and we're sharing the data. And we're sharing what the data revealed about where leads were coming from, where prospects were dropping off in the process, and what surprisingly small changes made a big difference in conversion rates. So if you are making marketing decisions or process decisions based on gut feeling rather than real numbers, definitely keep listening. This episode is going to be a game changer for you in knowing what data to look for and track and grab from your CRM in a non-overwhelming way. So without further ado, let's dive in. Aryel, I'm so excited to be back with you today to talk more about the prospect process, and we're going to be diving into the data today, sharing what data points to actually look at so that you can decide where to improve your prospect process. Because I think one thing that you and I know is that processes can always be improved, right? There's not just like the perfect process that never needs to be touched again.
Yes. That is correct. Processes are ever evolving, ever changing. And the reason why is because things change. Just because you put together the step-by-step guide, such as your workflow, it doesn't mean that that is going to remain how you follow your process moving forward, because there's regulatory requirements. You could find that you want to niche down. You could be adding tech that changes some of this processes. You could change custodians. You can change your CRM. There's a lot of different things that go into a process. So you have like your basic foundation, yes, but then you should always be having like wearing this hat of like, okay, how can I do things better? How could I be more efficient? How could I move this along more smoothly? And so you should always be in review and adoption mode, but it doesn't mean that you like are tweaking it and changing it every single time. You just want to be aware of what your process is, which is actually having that dialed in and having it implemented, and then just kind of always being aware of what it is and where you're at so that you can adopt it as needed and just make whatever tweaks and changes make sense for efficiency and for flow. And honestly, from an advisor perspective, we think the most important thing is time management.
Yeah, I think you touched on this really important line that you want to toe as you're thinking about this, which is you don't want to be trying to make changes and improvements every single time, right? That ends up working against you, but you do want to make changes and improvements over time, if that makes sense. So I think there's probably two stages here. There's really the process build, your first few years in business, or the first year or so that you even realize that you have a process and get it documented so that you can get it to a place that you feel really good about. And so there's that one set of tweaks and improvements when you're trying to figure out what the best process is. But then there's also this other set after you've had your process in place. Anytime your business undergoes a big change, that you want to be reviewing it and adapting it. Like you said, if there's a regulatory change, or maybe your business is growing and you're hiring on a new team member, or maybe you're niching down and you're realizing that this particular niche has a more specific set of needs than this broader base that you were serving beforehand. So would you add anything to that, of like these kind of do two different types of improvement, or maybe even just like two different phases of improvement?
No, I think that's exactly correct. Is there are two different phases. There's the initial phase you spoke about, that's your basic infrastructure. It's even deciding you have a process for something and what is that? And then actually, because it's one thing to get it from your out of your head and onto paper, but then taking it from paper and actually putting it into the systems that you use. So what's your tech, your CRM, if you're using a planning software, communication management, whatever that looks like. And then there's the second phase of, okay, you've got your basic infrastructure. There's not going to be a ton that changes once you actually build you basically have lay your foundation in the first phase, and then you kind of build up from there. And that's going to be your tweaks. Like we talked about, there's a couple different things that can happen. There's tech changes and evolves. There's team members that can come on and you hand off one thing to a team member because now it makes more sense. Or regulatory requirements, like we saw just in the last few years with any transition of 401k or individual retirement assets, you have to show that you've given a reasonable recommendation, the comparison with what account is being held in now. So there's the regulatory process. There's a lot of different things that can change or that you can tweak on top of your basic foundation. But what I always like to say is, like, you're not going to be making these tweaks and changes every single time you do it. What happens is you're through following your process, through following your foundational basic system that you've laid out, you are going to start to see things like, oh, that didn't go that way this time, or that went a little bit differently. And you're going to start to see these trends through using the process that you've laid out. Mm-hmm. And then what I like to do is I like to recommend that advisors are reviewing their workflows, they're reviewing their SOPs. Those actually go hand in hand. You should have a handwritten SOP, and then those SOPs are put into action through your system, through your workflows or your like tech integrations, right? And so then you are reviewing your SOPs, your workflows on a quarterly or a biannual basis. And you just yourself or your team are recording these things so that when you go to review, you're going, hey, this is actually a little bit different this time. Or now that we've integrated this tech, we can actually replace this step. You're just basically tweaking, not every single time, but kind of on like a realized basis through just being like having your processes in front of you, being aware of what they are, and then how could you just basically tweak them to make them a little bit better. We're solving for efficiency here, essentially.
Yeah. And I know that you are a really big fan of data when it comes to looking at these types of things, and not just going off of that kind of gut feeling like, ooh, I didn't really feel like that went very well with this last prospect. But we don't necessarily want that to be the reason to make a change. Like, we want to look at trends and data of how it's gone with a number of prospects. So can we look at some of the data points that I know you were looking for and that you gathered when we helped an advisor put this sort of process in place for themselves?
Yeah, well, specifically talking about the prospect process, is your process for that is when someone comes to talk to you. So they send you an email, they call you, they schedule an intro call through your website. Basically, you have a process through your prospect process of when that lead comes in, how are you going to lead them through that? How are those meetings, how's that engagement going to flow? And I think there's something even more important on top of that is your prospects come from somewhere. You're getting these conversations through what medium, what channels. So I think that data is really important because like your prospect process shows you how you're going to engage with them, what the meeting is going to look like, what happens in that meeting, what you solve for, how you communicate with them, at what interval you communicate. But then even more so, the reason I love data is because like, okay, great, you have that prospect come in, but where are they coming from? What made them reach out and contact you? And I think that data is really important. It's really telling because while your prospect process is for leads to come in and kind of almost like a present to future, right? Like how's that relationship going to develop and hopefully turn into a client? And then once become a client, what's your process for onboarding? But when they come to you, that historical data we look at for prospects is really important because it's like, well, where are your channels? Why did they reach out to you? What is it that they were looking for and trying to capture that? Because if you're having a really solid channel in which you're getting referrals through, but you're not leaning into that, you're missing something. Or let's say you're leaning really hard into marketing through a channel that's bringing in no referrals, no sources, or no conversations from prospects. That's kind of a misalignment of time and a misalignment of like your attention essentially. So that's why I love the data is that historical piece tells you where your prospects are coming in and it actually will give you some guidance on where you should spend your time, where you should be engaging more. And that's a really compelling and a really telling story. And I think that a lot of advisors don't always cue in on those pieces, and they're really telling. They're an important part of the story to be able to analyze essentially.
Yeah, I really love this notion about looking at the data to tell you what to improve and what to leave alone rather than the opposite, letting your feelings tell you what to improve or what to leave alone. And I'm wondering if we can give a couple of examples here from when we did this for an advisor and you took a really big deep dive into the data to really look at what was happening, yes, at the beginning when someone entered the process, and then what was happening at different points in the process through that journey of going from prospect to client. So let's like take a deep dive into some of that data that you found, and maybe we can look at the first half of the year when the process was not documented versus the second half of the year when the process was documented.
Yeah, there's a lot of data that we can look at because I think the thing with data is you're not just looking at it once. So what I did with this particular advisor that we worked with is I pulled data. So it was a newer firm and they didn't have this data all in one place. I really did have to go search for it. But then once I had gathered it all, we made sure it was somewhere that was easily accessible. And then any lead conversations that came in from that about prospects, we then, again, part of the process, part of the systems was to record that somewhere. So it was really easy to grab and go and be able to analyze if needed moving forward. So what we did is I pulled the data and we just looked at what are the channels. So some of the channels were friends and family referrals, they were existing client referrals, your center of influence or your professional referrals, CPAs, estate attorneys, insurance, whatever it was, professional contact. And then there was through your marketing or website, there was just quite a few channels. There was things like XYPN, NAPFA, Find an Advisor, profiles. And so basically we just gathered all the data and then we looked at like, okay, where are these leads coming from? And I think so not having had that the first year and then having that the second year that data was, we were able to like cue the advisor in on where things were coming from and found what were the strongest channels. Where some of the strongest channels were clients. And I think that the advisor knew that, but then the data really painted that picture. Like, this is your strongest lead, which, number one, congrats to you for servicing your clients so well that they felt comfortable enough to either recommend you, or when someone asks for their opinion on a recommendation, to give your contact. So I think that's a huge compliment. But without that data and really having those numbers, the advisor can't really like go, wow, I am doing a good job. Like, okay, great. That is making a difference enough for those conversations to be easier for clients, friends, family. I think the advisor knew that their strongest channel was client referrals, but until you actually spell out the data and actually show that to them, again, you're going from that feeling or that notion of like, oh, I think this is my strongest channel, to going, no, the data actually spells that out for you. Your strongest channel is your client referrals.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it with this advisor in particular made him realize, okay, I know I'm servicing my clients well. I know that they are the number one driver of my growth currently. So I'm going to lean into that and you mentioned this advisor is a newer firm. So the resources to invest in marketing are limited, and wanting to make sure that the resources are being used to the best of their ability. So why not put the resources, the energy or the time or whatever, towards a client newsletter where they're getting really good information. The touch points are there every single month. And there are opportunities for the clients to then forward that newsletter on, or to think, oh, this newsletter is about estate planning. My parents actually need to revisit their estate plan. I'm going to set them up with my advisor to make sure that their plans are up to date and in line with everything else they have going on. So I think that too is like using this data in action, seeing where the strongest points are, and then doubling down on that, rather than like letting shiny object syndrome drive the bus. Like, okay, I see this person doing really, really well on YouTube over here. I've never done YouTube, but I'm going to like go put all of my energy there, even though I have no idea right now if that's going to be worth my time and effort.
Yeah, well, just a couple of things to point on too. So back to this advisor that we built this kind of dashboard, like lead dashboard, right? And looked at, where leads were coming in from and the different channels. I think something that's really powerful about like that newsletter, and you always have these like CTAs, call to action. And I think that advisors maybe get like discouraged from like making that direct ask for, hey, if you know someone, send them my way. But because this particular advisor, their largest funnel or referrals is coming from clients, I think a natural CTA was able to be done in that newsletter because it was already happening. There was already those conversations going on. So I think that direct ask, that direct CTA of like, hey, if you know someone, they were already doing that. And so I don't think people minded if it was that direct ask, given the behavior that clients were already exerting, sending people their way. It was just a natural connecting point. But we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't looked at the data and pulled that. And so I think also by looking at where like your business as is, if you were not to change anything or do or make or change your actions or do anything different, I think that data of where your leads are coming in, looking at your referral channels is really important, because that'll give you kind of your natural like you said, where do I lean into? What do I hone into? And yes, there might be an advisor who's doing really well on YouTube. And so you go, okay, well, they're having luck, they're having success. I'm going to go try that. Well, instead of going and like investing your time and your money on something that might just be like a wild guess, my advice is look at what you're already doing. Look at where things are already coming in and see if there's any natural little things that you can do first through what's already being done. And when I say that is for this advisor that we're talking about, he was using XYPN, NATFA, Find an Advisor. He was using like the search engine. And we were seeing that like another really high referral channel for him was through these three areas, but specifically XYPN, the advisor search tool. And of those, though, his process was lead, intro call, and then what he calls collaboration meetings. And what he was finding is that 25% of those leads coming in from XYPN were converting from intro into the rest of his process. So what we found is that only 25% of the leads coming in from that channel, so even though it was high, 25% of those were being converted from intro to the remainder of the process. So there was 25% of the leads coming in were only converting to the rest of the process. So what I love about data is it's not only going to give you a picture of where you're at, but then it naturally might point you in your next direction. So it goes, okay, there's plenty of leads coming in. This is amazing. This is great. Lots of conversations. But what is the reason that they're not converting? Or what could we do to convert and get that percentage higher? And then it became a question of like, okay, what is the quality of those leads? So yes, those leads are coming in, we're having conversations, but if we were to answer the question, are they a good fit or not a good fit? And so we actually put that lens. So we had all the data, we put it all together in the form of a lead dashboard. And what I love is once you built that lead dashboard, you're honestly just updating it from there, because you're not just going to look at your data once. You should be in a constant process of updating it and continuously having your eyes on it, because data changes, trends change. Depending on what you're doing, your channels might change. You might start to see that this channel starts to go higher, and then you go, okay, why is that channel changing? What am I doing differently that is leading to higher number of conversions, higher number of clients saying yes? And so what was really cool is with the XYPN example is that we were looking at it a lens of, were they a good fit or not a good fit? And we were seeing that a lot of those leads, while their conversations, were actually not a good fit. And there's a reason they weren't going through the process. And it's because there was just like a service model difference, or there wasn't an identity of moving through that process, whether it's the advisor saying it wasn't a good fit or the client or the prospect just through conversations basically saying it's not a good fit. And so what we did is we said, okay, lots of leads coming through. We'd like to keep that number and even increase that number, but how can we now make it about a better fit as opposed, and weed out those who weren't a good fit? And so what that advisor ended up doing, and what the approach was, niching towards the ideal client who he wanted to work with. And so essentially what he did is his profile on XYPN, he ended up niching to his ideal client profile. And now what we're seeing after that happened, after that point, is the same amount of leads are coming in, but now that process, so those numbers are now at 50% conversion. So 25 to 50. And then those who go from intro into the rest of the process, it's a 100% to becoming a client.
That is incredible.
Crazy.
And they're just automatically better fits for this advisor too. Do you mind sharing what the niche change was?
Yeah. So this particular advisor kind of had 3 different client profiles that they were working with. And those client profiles just kind of came naturally from the client base he was already serving. Through servicing those clients, through having conversations, he was finding that the best clients he liked working with were senior software developers at Mag 7 companies. And so that was the profile shift change on XYP, and just to target towards those people. And basically, like, if they saw his profile, you would say, oh, okay, he works with senior software developers. That's not me. I'm going to go back to my search. Or if it was that person that fit that profile, they're going, oh yeah, I need to have a conversation with this guy. And that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah, they're already half sold on him because he's talking directly to them.
Yep.
And so then they're coming in and they're like, oh, confirmed. I like this guy. Let's keep moving through the process.
Yep. Exactly.
That's amazing. See, and this is what I think is so cool is when you look at the data from the whole part of the process, it just spills over into the improvements that you make through the rest of the process. And I think when we first started having this conversation, and I'm going to I'm not throw myself under the bus here, but acknowledge that I was wrong. And so what I was looking at when I was talking about this advisor's prospect was or process was, you have a lot of meetings here. That's a lot of opportunities for people to fall out. There's the discovery meeting, and then there's the two collaboration meetings, and then a proposal, and then ask to become a client. And I'm glad that the advisor kind of pushed back on me and was like, well, no, I really like this process because it allows me to get to know the client. It allows them to get to know me. We have a lot of time to figure out if we're a good fit or not, and we build a lot of trust and rapport through this process and all of that. So I was like, okay, you know what, that's totally fine. And so I think sticking with that process and being able to see the data play out once it was all documented and set up, and you had all of the communication templates that were happening in between the different types of meetings and all the follow-ups, it really actually did show that the process itself was a good process, and it does work well for this advisor, and he does have a really high conversion rate once these other things towards the beginning of the process were cleaned up and fixed.
Yeah, exactly what you're saying. Well, and also through, as you talk about, so yes, this going through this process and looking at the data, it allowed the advisor to, one, take it from their head, put it on paper, put it into a system. And if you hadn't gone through that exercise, I would still be living up here. And in through mapping out that process, it was being able to like actually have this image, this view of like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm doing with people, and this is the why I'm doing it this way. Every advisor is going to be different. Every advisor is going to have a different process, reason they do something. And for this particular advisor, it was, no, I want to spend time with them. I want to build rapport and rebuild trust. And I don't just get that after a 30-minute introduction call. There's more time and conversation and almost like commitment that has to be done in order to get a good feel for their situation. And if I truly can help this person and if it's a truly good fit for that. Because I think sometimes advisors feel like they have to help everybody and anybody. They have to get a yes from anybody who walks in the door because it's a lead and it's a potential for business. And I just don't think that that's true. I look at it as like you're driving a bus. You only have so many seats on the bus. You want the right people filling the bus, because if your bus is full, if you're at capacity and someone comes along who wants to get on the bus, but you have someone sitting in their seat, or you have someone occupying a seat that that person who's trying to get on would better fit or you would better serve them, well, you're full. That's not how that's going to work out. And so I think looking at the data really helps like paint a picture of that and having your process mapped out. So then also having your process mapped out, so your meetings and how you lead your prospect through your prospect process, and then looking at the data, it shows where the exit ramps are, and it shows at what rate are people falling off and where conversions aren't happening. And so by knowing the different exit points and how high or how low those exit points were, it goes into solve mode. It goes into like, okay, this is a gap. How could we possibly bridge this gap and make it to where client prospects are following through or leading through? And in this particular instance with this advisor, is he was leaning, part of his process, he was leaning on a follow-up email for them to schedule their next call. Well, that's just another email for them to read. It's another email for them to ignore. So then we're looking at, okay, how could we bridge that gap? If you're wanting an email, if you're wanting them to take action, click on a link, go look at the calendar, put their information in, book it, and they're not doing that. They're not looking at that email. They're not clicking on it. They're not opening it, or they are, but not following through. How could you bridge that gap? And for this particular advisor, one of the things that we implemented was scheduling the next meeting on that call. And I think that sometimes advisors maybe have this like, well, that's an administrative task. I maybe shouldn't be scheduling. Well, you know what? If that's a problem for you, then that's okay. Don't implement that. But for this advisor, he was not above that. He was like, yeah, all I have to do is open my calendar, find a time, confirm that with them, and basically built that into the process where that was making a big difference. As some people were willing just to schedule it right there. Or some people, like, even though he was offering, some people would just want to schedule as a follow-up, like, oh no, just send me the link and I'll schedule myself. And some people were actually doing that. And then also looking at it again, solving the problem of like, okay, people are not converting from intro call to collab one meeting. It's offering to schedule in the call, but then also like, okay, you're sending the email for them to schedule with their calendar link, but then no follow-up. Nothing comes after that. You're not following up for weeks and weeks later because you don't have a follow-up process. You don't have a follow-up sequence of how you're communicating and when. So then building that. So, okay, I've had this great meeting with them. I'm going to send them a follow-up email with a summary of our conversation. And here's the link to schedule. Okay. And then in 3 days time, if I don't see that come up, I'm going to send them a text like, hey, did you get my email? We'd love to schedule with you. Here's a link by text. Okay. They still, and then maybe they're like, oh, I'm a text person, not an email person. I'm going to click the link. I have a minute and quickly schedule from there. We were finding that follow-up sequence was helping those prospects more easily convert because it was a reminder. And sometimes that's all people need. That's sometimes all that goes into it is like you sent them an email at a time that they were busy. They've forgotten about it. They've moved on. Their need is still there. They're still wanting an advisor. They still have questions. They still need help, but they just need like the basic human element of like, we get busy. We all need reminders for things. Like I do the same thing with like doctor's appointments, dentist appointments. I hate going to the dentist. The dentist is like the worst thing ever, but the dentist I've picked, I have them for a reason because when it's time for me to schedule, they remind me. And then if I don't schedule on first reminder, they remind me again. Like they have a very vigorous follow-up sequence until where it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to schedule. I'm going to get my butt in that chair and I'm going to go to the dentist because they've helped me be accountable. And I think the advisor is sometimes that's what the prospect is looking for, is the advisor to help them do the same thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm actually going through this right now with my daughter's speech therapist. We have her in speech therapy, and right now our provider is virtual and it's not going very well. And so our pediatrician had like an in-person place. She like gave us a referral, so they were going to reach out to us. Well, they reached out to us one time. They sent a text message. I saw it during work. I put it down. It's now probably been like 3 weeks, and like I would love to work with them. I haven't gotten back to them yet. If they were to call me this afternoon, I would be like so grateful. Like, okay, yes, I'm ready to get started. And I think that sometimes as the service provider, we think we're being pushy or pesky and people just need time to think about a big decision or whatever it might be. But it's actually, you're doing a disservice by not following up because people get busy. They need help. They've expressed that need for help. And you following up is a really nice thing for you to do for them so that they can then move forward and start getting help with the problem that they've come out to.
Yeah, well, that's something else. Again, I'll always go back to the data. That's one thing that we usually find when someone is looking to schedule with an advisor. Usually something happens. Usually a fire has been lit under their butt and there's something that has happened, a job change, a market fluctuation, a life transition. They're having a baby, they're getting divorced, they're getting married, job change, salary increase, someone has passed away and they're inheriting assets. There's a lot of life events that happen, right? And usually we find there's a reason someone reaches out, something like that has happened. So one thing that I like to account for in the data is why someone is reaching out looking for a financial advisor, because usually we find it's not just something they randomly thought about, it's usually because something has happened. And so one of the things I love to have an advisor do is, if you use a online scheduler, is having them put in a question that's very intentional and says, what has led you to looking for a financial advisor? And then we put that into the data and we use that and we analyze it, because we'll find more often than not there are trends as to why people are reaching out. Say your biggest referral channel is your clients. Well, people from day to day with their friends, family, colleagues aren't just like talking about this amazing financial advisor they work with. Usually it's
They're
like,
not?
I don't think so. Maybe could be the possibility. But usually they're having a, something in their daily life, having a conversation, and something sparks that comment to be made about, like, oh, I work with this great financial advisor. They helped me with this. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. What's their information? I need help with that. I would love to have a conversation. So it's really important I also like to include that as part of the data.
Okay, so let's summarize a little bit. If somebody has never done this data gathering exercise in their life, we've talked about analyzing and finding the data. Where did people come from? So, where did they come in from is the first point to get. Where are the exit points in my process? So, if I have 2 meetings before I ask someone to become a client, how many people convert from meeting 1 to meeting 2, and how many people convert from meeting 2 to becoming a client? So we're looking at all of those possible exit points when they could either start to ghost or they could say no or whatever it might be. And then we also just talked about, why did you reach out to an advisor at this point? So what was the triggering event that happens for people when they suddenly feel that urgency to put a meeting on an advisor's calendar and reach out and get help with something? So those are 3 things. Are there any other data points that you think are really useful for advisors to gather as they are thinking about their prospect process and wanting to make improvements to it?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many data points that you could put into your, like, essentially your like collection, right? There's a lot of different points that you can look at. And I find that the longer I work with an advisor, the more data points we add, because it starts to get strategic from there. I mean, it's strategic anyways, but then you just build on that strategy. And the more data points you have to consider, because then we start looking at things like revenue increase, and we start looking at ROI, like time, that sort of thing. So I would add another data point that's really important to look at, maybe as like a fourth item, is your timeline as well. So I think that looking at timeline will actually put the median range in there for you of how long it takes from a lead to come in to getting your yes. Like, how long is it take between meetings? How many follow-up points did you have in those in between that? So I think a timeline's a really important thing to play into it, because I've seen with this particular advisor, we had someone come in, or he had an intro call in July with someone, and they didn't sign until November. And then just recently with a client, literally within the same month, within, I think, beginning of the month to the middle of the month, they were assigned client. Like, it moved it very quickly. So I think it also shows that people are at different intervals, but then you'll have like your median of like, what is the average? What is the timeline that it actually takes for someone to move through my process? So I think that that's an important point. So if I'm pulling up like the data dashboard, so like you have your dashboard, but then you have the data collection that goes into it. The things that I'm looking at are basically like by month. How did your leads come in? How many? Because I think that's another big point as well, is what's your, how many did you have in that month? So you can look at like, okay, average, because this particular advisor went from having like 1 to 2 per month in 2025 to having over 3 per month in 2026 alone, if you're looking at projections. So that's important, is like, okay, month over month, how many leads are coming in? And then I'm going to look at your lead source. Okay, so what are the channels? How are these people coming in? I'm going to look at initial contact date to them scheduling their first intro call. So that's saying, like, if someone is scheduling on your calendar, like say you have your intro call on your calendar, and that person from the time that they got on the website to actually scheduling, what does that lead time look like? Are they scheduling within a few days? Is it taking a couple of weeks for them to have that conversation? And then, yeah, basically the same thing through every single meeting thereafter. So when did you have your introduction date? And then when did you schedule your collaboration 1 date? And then when did you schedule your collaboration 2? When was the proposal sent? When was the agreement signed? So basically, we're just going to be looking at the timeline of when this prospect scheduled the different meetings. And then you're also going to be looking at, okay, did you capture that person as a client? Did they become a client? Did we lose the opportunity? You have a fit assessment. So was that particular prospect a good fit, a bad fit? When did you determine that they were a good fit? And then maybe a lost reason, like if they were a good fit, why did they not become a client? Or if they weren't a good fit, what was the reason? Like, what did the advisor determine they weren't a good fit? That's a lot of data just at a basic level, but it's all really important data because it's very telling.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it points to what improvements you should make. Like going back to one of those first examples of this advisor realizing that the quality of leads coming in wasn't very good. They weren't a fit. And so even though I'm getting good leads from here, no. And so because I'm getting good leads from this source, how could I manipulate this source so that the quality of leads goes up and then they can move through the process more?
Yeah, I think it's a really easy way, besides the time investment to go, if you don't have a good way of tracking this information, besides the time to go gather all of it and organize it, but then once it's organized, just keeping it up. I think it's a really easy way for you, instead of like going and just, like we talked about, like, oh, this advisor's having success on YouTube, I got to go do that. Instead of chasing leads, is look at your data of what you're already doing and how can you lean into that without big time investments, money investments, and just like, what are the small tweaks that you can do? Again, going back to that XYPN example of good lead source, but not good fits, and making a small tweak to where that lead source is still generating lots of conversations, but better conversations because they're better fit with your criteria.
See, the result there is sexy, but the process of getting that result there is not so sexy. It's not as sexy as starting a YouTube channel.
It is not as sexy as starting a YouTube channel. You are correct. But data is telling.
Data is telling, and data makes your life easier.
Yeah, data is telling. Data tells a story. And what is that story telling? You have to know what your story is in order to, it's like telling you where you've been so you can get to where you're going better.
Yeah, you can course correct easier without going off the rails.
Yeah.
All right, Aryel, this has been another really fun conversation about prospect processes. Thank you so much for coming on. If this is somebody's first time hearing you, where are the best places for them to find you?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I love seeing that I have new profile views, new connections, maybe land into my inbox. Let's have a conversation. Best place is LinkedIn.
Love that. Well, I will link to it in the show notes. This has been so fun. Thank you, Aryel.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. If you're eager to market your business in a way that feels good and actually gets results, sign up for the Finance Marketing Podcast newsletter in the show notes so you never miss another episode. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite listening app and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you back here next Friday.